So, welcome guys back, and happy Halloween, and let's just get this week behind us, Trace. Said I did have Daniel. Just several people said that they didn't have a number of their students didn't show up today. We had presentations that started on Tuesday, and I had several anxious, these are upper division English majors. They're such good students. What are we going to do about presentations? And I said, well, honey, we'll start them when we come back. And so they came, and I asked for some volunteers to come in. And my first one, she was like right at the door. I hadn't even asked for volunteers. I said, Dr. Carter, can I do it? Can I do it? Can I do it? I said, well, sure. She had apparently been there at the party, and anyway, she's a residence hall director, and she said people are signing out, and Justin and her students didn't show up, and those at the glazed over, and then she said, well, if you guys need to, it's okay if you want to go, and everybody who wasn't her South Korean students left, all the American ones did. I mean, because this is terrible. It's horrible. And I don't know, you said a bunch didn't show, and those that did were just kind of, Those who volunteered to present, they presented, and then we were about halfway done with the class, and I said, let's just put this week behind us, shall we? So if any of us need to bow out, but it helps me to just kind of just keep on going.
I came in on my. I know some people canceled class because it was one of those. We got that email from the president about all excuse absences. So I know some people class, and I said I would come in for the people who wanted to distract, like people wanted a routine. I would just have the room, and I had 5 and 7 for my turnout. And the only people who came, none of them had any direct ties. Didn't know anyone there. Those are the only, so that shows how many did.
Yeah.
Because I had I had 12 between the two instead of the 40 I should have seen. And I told Jess, I said, the worst part of this is I don't know all the others. I haven't heard from. I had one student email me, said, my mother won't let me come back to campus yet. Is it okay that I missed Monday? She must not have seen that email. I said, yeah, we don't know. And I told her directly, I said, we're closed till Thursday, so if you can come Friday, if not, we're cool.
Yeah. It's so horrific. So, in other news, so we'll do the presentations that we have today, and then I want to look to what I have asked you guys to do for your for our conversation. I mean, you guys are doing it in here, and they're doing it in there. Because it's sort of designed to help us kind of begin thinking even more deliberately about our final project by looking back at what we said previously. And I'm going to give you guys, I've got a slideshow on kind of getting started with your final project. And as I see it, I like to talk to you guys about ways in which these midterm projects might lead into your final projects, even if you're just kind of taking the the framing and some of the questions that are emerging from it and applying it to new artifacts or new people or new events or something like that. So, mass shootings is certainly a topic. The rhetoric surrounding that, I'm not sure it's one that I'm ready to dive into, but it's certainly timely.
I had to cancel the last joke on my infographic because of this.
Really?
Yeah, I was going to make a joke about the ID that's acceptable to vote in the state. And one of them is a handgun license. One that isn't is a school license. But I had to take that out. I mean, I just said it now, but
that's interesting.
I had to cut it. I just couldn't bring myself to say that.
Yeah.
As part of the formal presentation.
Completely.
So I cut it.
Such
much funnier 2 weeks ago.
So were a lot of things, right? Okay. So here's all we have is so anyway, I already told you what we're going to do. So since Brian is here, and I think he's the only one of us here who is ready to, willing present this week, or volunteers to. So we'll begin with Brian, and then we'll go with Abigail and Sarah, and then we will move to conversations about the prompts that I've put in the class discussion, and then the guidance that I'm providing you guys on getting started with your final project. So with that, I will hand the computer over to Brian. Down.
Oh, okay. I will hold it.
Back on it.
So I'll do the preamble, a slightly longer version of it
Okay.
as I'm walking over here because it's not a written thing. I originally wrote a script for this presentation that I was going to try to one-to-one put on an infographic, but I wrote way too much. And I liked what I wrote too much to butcher it. So
I hear you.
I then took the TLDR of the script and used that for the infographic. So that's why the order matters, because the words that I'm going to go through in the script are way longer, and then the infographic is sort of like a summary of it.
Gotcha.
It'll make more sense when we go through this, hopefully.
Brian, can you tell me what a TLDR is?
Long didn't read.
Oh, okay. Thank you for asking that. I was really tough puzzling out whether I knew that or not. I did not.
Too long didn't read. Which is not good advice to give students or anything like that. The other thing is that everything not in quotation marks is thing explained.
Okay.
So the whole bit is. Okay. There is a paper that you need for most things, like proving you are real. You need this paper to come from the place you are living, even while you're still living there. You can get this paper with great hard things blocking you from the place you are staying. Place, in this case, is a building where people work and give these papers out to people who can prove they live in the same place this building is. Without this paper, you might agree with words like this. Quote, it is possible to live in a place, be in a place, physically inhabit a place, and nevertheless fail or refuse to encounter it as a place of specificity, differentiation, and potential invention, end quote.
Where's that?
Skinnell, 143. Because if you don't have this paper, the real stuff of the place is hidden, and the things it offers are not for you to use. You cannot even with effort make yourself not a part of this place, since this paper holds your body from moving to another place, since you cannot prove you should get papers to own a home in a new place. Since this paper is a real thing and you can touch it, even though the place you get it from is not a real place unless we say it is, you can think about it as a way to pretend that you have power over your situation. The way women used to use two-wheeled things to make a way for themselves and make different paper that is green and can get you away from the men who fight hard. Even if you need the thing we are talking about here, that paper. This paper in a way makes you real. In the eyes of others, you belong and you have power. You might say it is like the two-wheeled thing and writing in the sense used here. Quote from Hallenbeck. In other words, women writers drew from the popular magazine in order to construct a culturally viable ethos for the woman bicyclist that carried within it the potential for social change, even as it reassured audiences that the figure would not threaten the existing social order. People with this paper are members of the place they live. To get this paper, they need one other paper that says they once came into being in a room full of doctors and nurses and at least one parent, a mother, since that's how that stuff works. But once you're real in the sense you can be pictured for this paper, you still need the paper from before you were as tall as you are getting the picture taken for this paper. You need a number, too, that was given to you as a baby and will follow you all your life. If you don't have this number, it is hard to get this paper and be thought of like a person from this place you live, even while you still live here, but hidden in the shadows like not a person. You cannot then pick the people who make the laws making you not a person, which keeps you from being a person as much as not having this paper, like these words. And this is from Juan. Perhaps the most obvious of the rights and privileges of citizenship is voting, which can be impacted by a critically literate approach to one's voting choices. Another might be using one's literacy skills towards participatory action. I'll tell you a story about getting this paper before my words stop. I have the number that makes you real in this place since I was a baby. I also have that other paper you get in the room you were born. But in this new place, they didn't like that paper I had since it was from another place. A place I don't think they liked since they didn't accept my paper from it. I also have pictures on my arms that were seen in the place they give this paper, so I might have looked like a bad man when I tried to explain my papers were real and I had my number. The lady looked at me like I should leave the place quickly and quietly, so I did. I then used that green paper to get a paper through the sending of papers in pockets of paper. Now that I have this paper from a bigger place than the smaller place the woman worked at, I don't need her littler paper from her anymore. Even without the littler big papers, just a plain old paper from my last place, I was still able to pick a leader, but had to sign another paper that I was who I said I was. So picking people with the wrong papers was easier for me than getting the right paper to pick leaders. A lot of this has to do with being born in this place, so I was able to get the paper one way or another. People who cannot get the paper without much more green paper and having people who study words and laws for a living on their side may never get this paper. So I don't say this to make you feel bad for me. I just mean to point out how wrong the whole paper getting is. For people from another place, they might agree with these words, and this is from Vieira: the local Department of Motor Vehicles, the elementary school, and the university all become, in effect, borders. Which is what makes the infographic make sense. So, again, all thing explained. This is the paper you get in the room with the doctors and nurses. This is my 35-year-old birth certificate that they told me we will not recognize. Raised for everything. I mean, it's as legit as you can get. Also, that's the paper they didn't like in this place. This is the paper I wanted a new one for, since the place it says is not my place of living. So, valid other state ID, wouldn't take that either. But since they didn't like my first paper, no piles of green paper would fix the problem, even though I have this number paper, right? This is the number paper. And it's sad, but this place does not like the paper you can get that looks like this for picking the people who make laws better to make getting paper easier. Because they laughed at me when I tried to give them. And that paper I had to sign was an affidavit. Like, they let me vote if I signed an affidavit that I could not get valid ID. The bigger paper I have, I didn't bring or scan. It was a passport. And the mailing papers and pockets of papers, because envelopes was too big. I didn't know.
I love it. I love it.
So that's
what I got from it too. That's so much, so interesting, so good, so poetic, so rich, and it does that beautiful job, which one of the things I love about things explaining so much when I can't quite do it, the way you guys are just beautiful, is it just makes everything familiar really strange, so bizarre. I mean, it's already bizarre. The whole of it is bizarre, but when you put it in these words, bananas. It's just I almost think there needs to be a Schoolhouse Rock sort of animation set up for this, right? So before you move away, can you talk a little bit about your writing process? I mean, how did you land here?
Well, I had to start with the broad topic being identification, and I had already the experience of trying to just get a state ID in Texas.
Okay, that was complicated, that by itself?
That's the lady who wanted me to leave. That was me trying to replace my New Jersey ID with it. So I go there with my original. That's what this is. I mean, the DMV or DPS here said your birth certificate needed to be from the vital statistics. It needed a raised seal. It needed a signature on it. And I'm telling her, this is what it says. This is what she said to me. We will not recognize this.
That?
Yeah. She told me no.
But that was on the list of the things that we
And I
recognized.
showed her this. I'm showing her 1-to-1, 1-to-1, 1-to-1. And that's when she got real, like, you should probably go. Like, she got we will not recognize that. I said, well, what do you want me to do with this? She said, get a passport. So I did, but that renders the state ID useless. What I came to find out way later is they wanted a long form with my parents' names on it.
Long form.
But all they needed to say was those words, because those words mean something to me. And I could have said, oh, okay, I'll get right back to you. But they instead just said no.
And the paper that tells you the paper that you're supposed to have doesn't say that you need
Didn't
long
say
paper.
that. Nope. But she was the manager. She was the one they went and got when I was talking to the first lady. So there was no one else. It was them or the police. It looked like they were ready to call cops. So I was like, that's why that joke about my tattoos, because I wasn't there in a t-shirt. And it's a very different approach people have towards me when I'm in state buildings in a t-shirt versus in state buildings like this. So
Yeah.
it's better than it used to be, but so yeah, I just got a passport instead. I didn't scan that because it talks about the internal electronics, and I was afraid to break it. So I was like, let me just. But this I just redacted with Paint. If you scan it and go to open with Paint 3D, you just select and hit delete, and you can just redact your own
that's
documents.
cool.
So it was really easy to just see. It's all creased. This is old paper. It's the original. It's old enough to be all creased. And I had this and they didn't want to see it. I had this, they didn't want to see it. This, of course, they never want to see.
Well, I don't know when that paper began, the number became the number that you get when you're a baby, because you didn't get that baby number when in 1971. I didn't get it until I was a teenager.
No, I had, by the time I was a teenager, I'd lost my first one, which is a nightmare. Never lose it. You gotta get another one, it's a nightmare.
Well, that's
Never
the main
lose
thing
it.
when you're a baby, that paper doesn't.
Well, it's better signature on this one than it was on the original one. I signed it when I was like 12. And it was like penmanship class signature, and it just didn't look like anything I could reproduce now. So in a way, it worked out.
So what did you take away from this experience of looking back at our books through this lens and through this question, and then explaining that you maybe didn't think about before? You're coming at it now with a question in mind and sort of a poetic project in mind. Any neat takeaways from that?
Well, for making connections, I mean, place the one of the early statements was that, it's a place because we say it is. It's only a place if we're in it to do things. Initially, I didn't understand that as it came about. I was like, well, then I started thinking about the places I've had to go and the people in there. Like, that woman doesn't have any inherent power over me. If I met her on the street and she didn't like me, she could just cross the street. But since I was there in a state building trying to, fulfill a function there, she had all the power to just say no, to regardless of overwhelming evidence that I was correct. It didn't matter. And it was because of like what side of the desk we were on, which is a power differential that is completely arbitrary. And then I started thinking about the IDs you need to get IDs, and kind of the absurdity that your birth certificate is literally to prove that you were born where you say you were born. And your ID, like if they card you for a pack of cigarettes, it's to prove you were born when you say, but also in the state, because you go swinging around a non-Texas ID, and you get weird. People look at it like this isn't right. Like, you shouldn't have this. And I'm like, but I can't get the other one. So it's all kind of made up. And then borders we talked about in Vieira specifically. So I can't. It's not that I can't empathize. It's that I can't do a project on immigrant paperwork without much more time and access to people who are not in this class. But it doesn't mean I can't point at the same absurdity and the same difficulties I came as close as possible as saying, like, as a white man in Texas, I still wasn't successful because of how arbitrary this stuff. I came as close to saying, but I don't know if those words would have worked.
Yeah, just where is the power in the machine? Where we say it is. Yeah. Who says it is? Well, the people who have the power to say it is. and to vote the people who say that it is.
It's so crazy that your birth certificate and Social Security
wasn't enough.
And it's like the main thing.
And it said on the paper that and then she was very, very upset that I had the paper from the website and showing her.
We're talking about like state IDs.
I was just trying to update, so it was and you know how long they need to establish residency at the Department of Public Safety here? 30 days.
Yeah. So I'm from Texarkana, and we're border city, and I don't remember which state, Arkansas or Texas, they increased like the age for smoking. I don't remember which side.
It's 19 in Jersey. It has been for a while.
It's like 20-something now.
Is it really?
Yeah, so they can't buy it in Texas, but they can buy it in Arkansas. And it's like just right there on the state line. And it's like they can come over to Texas and use that same ID and not get it, but go back to Arkansas and get it. It's like so weird.
Oh, yeah, that would have been. Yeah, and when they did it I was a smoker when they did it in New Jersey, so it didn't apply to me because I was over the time. But I remember seeing on the wall, because they say if you weren't born before, and then it's a rolling date, but it says like this is the date before this date, like or after this date, don't even ask. Like this is the date, and it has to be this or earlier, and they rotate that every day. And I saw that the year was different. And I was like, well, that's weird. It's 19 now. It seems so arbitrary. What's that 1 year going to do?
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Oh, there she is. Hello. So let's go ahead and look at Sarah's. She says initially she wanted to create an infographic using Canva or a picto chart, but I wasn't ever able to find a template that fit the visual image I had in my head closely enough. I think Katrina was mentioning the same thing. I'm definitely not visually and graphically talented enough to start one from scratch and make it look nice. Alas, I ended up using one of the presentation templates in picto chart. And then other technology messed her up. Just said screencastify cut her off literally the very last moment. She was able to finish her presentation, but just be aware that it ends abruptly.
Hi, everyone. So this is my presentation on citizenship and citizenship rhetoric. In Producing Good Citizens, Amy Wan states that defining citizenship can be both absolutely clear and seriously tricky business. However, a working definition is an important detail that must be included in any discussion of citizenship and citizenship rhetoric. So with this in mind, I thought back to our previous discussions about the actual dictionary definition of the term and thought that would be the best place to start. Merriam-Webster provides two similar yet distinctive definitions for citizenship. One, membership into a community, and two, the quality of an individual's response to membership in a community. For me, this first definition is more about a status or a state of being, while the second is more about actions and behaviors. In each of the texts we've discussed in the first half of the semester, the running thread has been the topic of citizenship and how this idea has been interpreted and analyzed in multiple ways from various perspectives. This presentation focuses mainly on the ways that citizenship is explained and understood through 5 specific texts. A few of these texts address the idea of citizenship from a perspective that is more closely aligned with the first of the definitions provided and is more concerned with how an individual's status as a citizen is determined, while others address the idea of citizenship from a perspective more closely aligned with the second definition that is more concerned with the actions of individuals who are considered members of a community. To begin, in Lone Star Rhetorics, the editors have compiled a series of essays that details what it means to be a citizen of various geographical regions and cities within Texas. One essay is about being a citizen of Austin, another is about being a citizen of the city of Lockhart, home of Texas barbecue, and on and on. While each of these essays is about different locations, the common thread throughout the book is the understanding of the importance of being a citizen of a particular place. For this text, citizenship is all about being a member of the group or the community. This text reinforces the idea that being a citizen is about the connections an individual feels with the other members of the community, the landmarks of the place, the history of the area, or even the traditions of a specific location. And all of these contribute to the rhetorics of a place. What is important here is simply being there. In Claiming the Bicycle, Sarah Hollenbeck's discussion of citizenship is less about being located in a specific geographical place, but more about being a member of a group or a group of other individuals who share common interests and goals. Throughout her book, she tells of a community of women whose shared interest in bicycling brought their community together. Unlike Lone Star Rhetorics, which is more about citizenship in relation to a specific geographical location, Claiming the Bicycle focuses on citizenship as being a member of a group that is connected by a common interest. Much like the editors of Lone Star Rhetorics emphasize the importance of being there and being a citizen, Hollenbeck too emphasizes the being there as the determining factor of being a citizen. The women she discusses were all there as a member of a particular group with a shared interest at an important point in history. The rhetoric of this community is documented in the various archival documents that include clothing designs, printed advertisements, and patents for various bicycling tools created by and for the women in this community. Kate Vieira's American by Paper provides a good bridge between the texts that examine the idea of citizenship along the lines of the first definition and the texts that examine the idea of citizenship as explained in the second definition. In American by Paper, Vieira specifically focuses on the legal, documented notion of a citizen being a member of a community in the legal sense. And while she is focused on the idea of citizenship as an indication of membership in a community, which is reflected in the first definition, she also goes on to explain the response of some groups of immigrants to being members of a community. American by Paper is less about the feeling of being there and more about the provable, documentable, fact-based idea of citizenship, an idea of citizenship that is probably considered more concrete because of the legal associations and documentation. The very strong and clear relationship between citizenship and the rhetorics of place in this context can be seen in the archival documents that Vieira references. Throughout the book, she notes the importance of legal forms and documents that solidify one's status as a citizen, as well as personal archival documents that testify to the lived experiences of the immigrants who depend on those legal documents. And moving on to producing good citizens, Juan shifts the focus more to citizenship in regard to the second definition, the quality of an individual's response to membership in a community. This discussion of citizenship is more about the actions of individuals once they meet the first definition and have already become members of the community. Juan examines the link between citizenship and literacy by considering and analyzing the struggles over defining citizenship, its historical development as it achieves status. Within this context, citizenship as a status is directly connected to citizenship as an action. As Juan explains, through specific periods in history, immigrants were taught how to demonstrate good citizenship in their actions and behaviors after gaining the status of a citizen. She shows the blatant connection between rhetorics of place and citizenship in the exams, papers, and textbooks used by the U.S. government in their citizenship training programs, as well as in first-year writing programs. And in Kelly Ritter's analysis and discussion of the mental hygiene films of the 1940s and 1950s, she explains the emphasis on the importance of correct behavior. The videos she references emphasize the importance of good manners and meeting social expectations as evidence of good citizenship. These videos are similar to some of the other texts in their demonstration of the second definition of citizenship. According to these videos, good citizenship is the actions and behaviors of an individual that can be witnessed by others and which indicate a person's ability to become a member of a community through their actions. Young people are taught the appropriate ways to communicate and behave in order to fit in and be a good, productive citizen. These videos serve as archival documents that embody the connection between rhetorics of place and citizenship. The videos themselves are the rhetorical documents that demonstrate the actions and behaviors required for good citizenship. So as noted, each of these texts mentioned address the idea of citizenship, and they each do so in different ways. Lone Star Rhetorics and Claiming the Bicycle emphasize the importance of being a member of a specific community. The particular community may be built around a particular geographical location or a common interest or experience. The essays in Lone Star Rhetorics are all about what it is like to be there in Texas at specific places and times. Claiming the Bicycle is also all about being there in the context of a group of women who were embracing the changes and opportunities that became available to them through the use of the bicycle. Both of these texts emphasize the importance of belonging to a group, of being there, and the editors of Lone Star Rhetoric explain that there is a relationship between a body and a place. And as is seen in the individual experiences related in both of these books, this relationship brings about opportunities for new things to be said and written as a result of being there. Unlike Lone Star Rhetorics and Claiming the Bicycle, which focus more on communities built around a location, interest, or common experience, American by Paper, Producing Good Citizens, and the mental hygiene films focus more specifically on the experiences and behaviors of individuals once they become citizens. In Producing Good Citizens, Juan explains why educating immigrants is considered to be so important. She states that education eases anxieties about citizenship because it offers structured, institutionalized, and routinized spaces for widespread production of citizenship and communication of citizenship ideals. This emphasis on instilling citizenship ideals is reinforced in each of these texts. Only after new citizens have gained the status of citizen and learned about the expected actions and behaviors of citizens can they truly demonstrate citizenship as a member of the community. So with all of this in mind, I have kind of defined citizenship rhetoric as the language, ideas, beliefs, and artifacts of commonality that denote an individual's inclusion in a particular group. The commonalities may be directly stated or implied as expectations of behaviors and beliefs of members of the given group or community. And being able to fit in by speaking the language of commonality and sharing the ideas, beliefs, and artifacts of a group, an individual is able to demonstrate the relationship between place and identity. And in creating my thing explained definition of citizenship rhetoric, I came to the language, ideas, beliefs, and things that people share that show a person's place in a group. The things people share may be clearly stated or suggested as acts and beliefs of members of the group. And being able to fit in by speaking the shared language and sharing the ideas, beliefs, and things of a group, a person is able to show the tie between place and person. And that wraps it up.
Oh, that was perfectly timed. Yeah, it's over.
Well, when she was reading, I wrote down de-ethnizing immigrants is what was going on in Juan's book, is what she was addressing when she talked about the unions and the other agencies that were teaching English. And it was a way, like what we saw in the hygiene films, a way of Americanizing.
Yeah. With the assumption that the American is the neutral category, that
Maybe not neutral, but the right way.
well, it's the right way of assuming too. I think that there's a way of being in the world, and then there are the others.
Yes.
In that sense, then I'm at my resting point when I'm white and male and cisgender and all of that stuff.
And I speak English well.
Right, which is really interesting. When I was doing an external review for somebody who was going up promotion to professor. Sometimes that happens. You're further along your career, and I've been to many of these, but I did one before somebody going up at Washington State, and this person was going up at St. John's. I didn't ever research, which is part of the point, but it's related to stuff I do, and I'm really interested in it now. But she assigns students to write about race and about their kind of regional experiences with race, and she's write about the first time you became aware of race, write about the races of people around in your neighborhood. And she said that the people who were, the white students were, usually if they're in white neighborhoods, are far less likely to talk about race at all than their students of color. Because again, white is just, right? White's not a race, but it is, and as much as anything's a race. So yeah, that's interesting.
Well, then let's wrap up with Abigail. Thank you, Abigail, for giving us a PDF because computers, robots, as Brian says. So, Rhetorics of Citizenship, presented by Abigail Mosley. Okay, this is the definition. According to Rhetorics of Citizenship, is defined by producing good citizens, literacy training in anxious times, in inventing place, and writing Lone Star rhetorics, claiming the bicycle, women rhetoric, and technology in 19th century America, and American by paper, how documents matter in immigrant literacy. The questions. What do these various training materials teach their students about what it means to be a good citizen? What's the relationship between good manners and what it means to be a good citizen of a particular place? What do these contributions have to teach us about relationships between rhetorics of place and citizenship? What do I mean by citizenship rhetorics? How does this definition come out through the rhetorical histories from the first half of the course? Oh, nice timeline. Okay. Publishing year of each book analyzed in the Thing Explained summary. Okay. So, in producing good citizens, literacy training in anxious times, Juan tells of the lasting tie of reading and writing in groups of people, the sharedness that Sarah was just talking about it. Reading and writing in groups of people to present-day times by showing the use of reading and writing to help money bias and its lasting use to a workforce group, work focus group. Well, that was an interesting slip. Today, as in the past, teachers continue to work as an important part of the reading and writing training and group making business. Group making business is so interesting too, because that's also not a passive process. They're produced. These groups are made to fit in and represent the specific things they want them to, which is what Katrina just said. Okay, and then 16, American by Paper, How Documents Matter and Immigrant Literacy comes out. The era builds on understanding from reading and writing guesses, that have long rivaled each other in order to grow a new guess of reading and writing, one that takes into news its close coupling to paper and forms. This site leads to a deeper understanding of how reading and writing actually follows meaning by passing around and around their places and the lives of people. Nice. I love that. A circulation by passing around and around through places in the lives of people. And then 2018, Claiming the Bicycle, Women, Rhetoric, and Technology in 19th Century America, making a serious offering to studies of women reading and writing and speaking. Claiming the Bicycle states the use of a growing thing of reading and writing skill and shows the work of many types of people to take the skills to give a higher position to this change. And then the collection 2018's Inventing Place, Writing Lone Star Rhetorics, cut up into 5 parts matching to Texas parts. Studies consider looks, places, food and drink, memory, and race and class. Among the points covered by people are the Imagine Austin Town Planning Initiative, the terror of Texas barbecue, the race past of Grand Saloon, Texas, Denton, Texas, bad parts of Texas, and how the state or any place is held to change. I like that. Okay, so she says, this is a nice chart, that the more legally focused looks at citizenship rhetoric are, I guess, up here. By American by Paper is more legally focused, and the more socially focused. I'm not good at charts. Maybe read this for me.
Well, I think what she's saying is that the American by Paper is dealing with a lot of legal content issues, whereas the Bicycle had a little bit, because of course we had patents.
Sure.
And then the
oh, I
And then
see.
it
Okay,
splits,
more
so
social.
yeah.
Okay.
Then we go to the social side.
Okay, I gotcha. Legal, social. Okay, gotcha. That makes a lot of sense.
And in this,
But I would argue that producing good citizens should be more closer, if not to the middle line, if not slightly over more to the legal line.
Why would you say that?
Well, because it was dealing with immigrants and them taking on their legal status here in America, and a part of their legal status is you got to be able to pass the test.
Right. And interestingly, as well, the legality of the American paper is also socially focused, because
That's true.
for the same reasons, right? I mean, these people are let in, but we're going to have to mash them into particular shapes through our, factory that is American citizenship. These guys.
unless we're meant to look at social less in terms of social justice and more in terms of groups that get together, because then Inventing Place was all about your group in Austin, not necessarily your interpretation of how Austin has changed based on your interaction with it, or your barbecue social like a group, like a party,
Right.
versus social like social justice or social studies in an academic setting.
Okay.
Perhaps. I don't
So
know,
like
she's not
social,
here.
like funsy kind of
Maybe,
stuff. Yes.
yeah.
Like purposefully, I have access to this and enjoy it. Kind of. That makes sense. Yeah. It's like you're right. That those are different things. Social justice and social. So, That's an interesting conversation. Thank you, Abigail. Here's your thing, explain personal definition of citizenship. Founded on all the books so far, citizenship can be known as person being a giving part of a group. It presents some strong points to those who have the name, such as means of approach to care and schooling. Oh, as a citizen. The name is usually given to those who are from the groups with some share for new people. The first group is always made up of people with a lot of money who have most of the money for their own needs. In larger groups, power plays is set up by those with money to allow for them. Those without any money, and sometimes the middle class, have the worst lives because of this. Here. Okay, she's explained each of the books and through that citizenship then. American by Paper says citizenship is being a working part of groups. While pointing out the openings between that idea and the actual workings where citizenship stands on paper rather than work. This book's understanding is more about citizenship from the past instead of papers. I'm going to come back to that first sentence, and I don't like us to talk about that. That's interesting. Producing good citizens. Producing good citizens brings together the working brain, good acts, moving picture, through taking each part and stating what is thought of as good acts. It makes people fit in American groups. How do working people act? Oh, it's interesting questions. In Lone Star rhetorics, being a part of a local state is understood as all of the things those people have lived through while they have lived there. Things that have made someone a part of are the things that have happened that have given them the use to be from this place rather than being given it. That active passiveness keeps weaving through all these interesting ways, doesn't it? I mean, all of you guys too. Claiming the bicycle. Being a woman is more about the want and the obvious things that make up what a woman is. While claiming the bicycle focuses on the usual things set by the whole group, the focus point of the book and the cycle is to show how many ways the forms in which women live. This is how women are. Yeah, this is the reality of it. Gosh, these are like poems. I just really want to... Okay, here's some connections. So she pulled together Lone Star Rhetorics and Claiming the Bicycle. In both Lone Star Rhetorics and Claiming the Bicycle, being a part of something is stated as being in the group and where the people fit there within. So yeah, where you fit within that group. The books talk about many different groups, and it's interesting in both of those. Oh, should maybe say this. There's an active, like you have more. There's less passiveness than are happening to the things. The books talk about many different groups of people within the lower state and how the acts of those people within the many spots in the state. The book talks about groups of people within one area and names their acts by living within one part or another. Lone Star Rhetorics also talks about being a person in the group by how each person works toward the good of the group. Claiming the Bicycle states these ideas through words of how women become more like each other and themselves as that act was new to the group. Sarah Hallenbach takes the approach of women becoming a stronger group through accepting the act into their lives, using the act taught to care for others' use of their own, and realizing how they are as women, while Lone Star Rhetorics says this by area. So by act, by area, that's interesting. I believe all these books show us how working makes people a part of groups, and while the paper part of being a part of a group rests with laws, it is because of the need for working people these things are around. That's true. The things from the first half of the course make it clear being a part of the group can be a given, but it always focuses on what is worked for. Claiming the Bicycle, American by Paper, Producing Good Citizens, and Lone Star Rhetorics. And the time talked about in Claiming the Bicycle, women were told to take care of themselves, but that made them just as able of caring for themselves as any man. The problem came from not being a part of some areas of this group. Claiming the Bicycle was a bad thing because the people were not clear as to what that meant for times to come. Women are changing, oh my gosh. In American by Paper and Producing Good Citizens, the needs for people new to the group state are needed to have and hold jobs that meet other needs. So yeah, you guys need to look like and do specific things. You certainly need to read English because that's how the instructions are written. The problem comes from not being able to be a working part of the group
without the right papers. And in Lone Star Rhetorics, people are considered part of the group when they have done the same things as other people who live in the area and who have met with others who live in that area. Every book and its people agrees being part of the group is a given when the person in question is good for their group. That's so interesting that the people who are in charge of membership have decided that what you're doing is good for the group. And that's interesting.
I would agree with that in the abstract, but my personal experience contradicts that every step of the way. Well, I'm a graduate student, so it's good for the school that I'm here. And they get more money from the state if they would classify me as a resident, but they don't want it.
Well, no, that's how
It's good for them they would get more money from the state if they would just change.
the lack of logic that is involved in any sort of bias is just astounding. It's true. We cripple ourselves all the time with bias. Like that. You're not really paying attention to how much better things would be if you weren't an a-hole. She says. Let's see. So I'll do point by point. We'll do it this way and then we'll go back. In both Lone Star Rhetorics, Claiming the Bicycle, and Claiming the Bicycle, citizenship is defined based on community and where the personalities fit there within. The text discusses many different groups of people within the state of Texas and how the behavior of those people within their various postal codes. The text discusses certain groups of people within a certain area and defines their behavior by living within a zip code. Lone Star Rhetoric also addresses citizenship by how supportive individual members are toward the community. Claiming the Bicycle echoes these ideas through descriptions of how women became aligned with themselves as bicycling entered society. Sarah Hallenbach takes the approach of women becoming a stronger group through accepting the bicycle into their lifestyles, taking the reins, using the self-sufficiency talk for men's benefit for their own, and realizing how capable they are as a gender, while Lone Star Rhetorics classifies this by area. And let's see, I'm just going to keep on this side. I believe all of these texts show us contributions made by people citizens, and while the legality of citizenship rests mainly with political institutions, it's because of the need for contributions that these legalities insist. Rhetorical histories from the first half of the course make it plain citizens may be people who are born into the group, but always focuses around contributions and also, as you just said, the value we do or do not place on those contributions, whether or not we see those contributions as valuable when they come from other people. With the right papers, the right background, the right look and existence. Let's see. In the time period addressed in Claiming the Bicycle, women were taught to cook, clean, and raise children first and foremost, but that made them just as capable of caring for themselves as any man. The issue came from being excluded from many sections of society like business, medicine, law, etc. Claiming the Bicycle was a terrifying prospect, not because it was new, but because women asserted their equality and then realized that they could have a wife with the life of her own, a citizen in her own right without the need for a husband to make her a contributing member. In American by Paper and Producing Good Citizens, the legal system's requirements state immigrants are required to have and hold jobs that meet certain criteria. The immigrants need to show they are contributing members of society, and then even when they do. The issue comes from being unable to be a contributing member of society without the proper documentation. And in Lone Star Rhetorics, people are contributing members of society considered citizens when they have experienced the same things as other people who live in the area and who have interacted with others who live in that area. I can sing deep in the heart of Texas as loud and proud as I want, but I haven't met the grocer on Mill Street or eaten at Spring Creek Barbecue on steak nights. Every book and its authors agree citizenship is automatic when the member in question is beneficial to their preferred society. And then those agree that. So here's her thing explained. Based on all the readings thus far, citizenship can be defined as a person being a contributing member of a group. It presents some advantages to those who have the title, such as access to medical care and education. Title is usually given to those who are born into the groups with some allowance for newcomers, sort of. The beneficiary group is always composed of wealthy people who have the most of the public resources due to their personal resources. As public resources due to their personal resources, true. At advanced groups, political power plays are enabled by the wealthy to advocate for them, the poor, and occasionally middle class are those who suffer the most. American by Paper defines citizenship as being a productive member of society while pointing out the disconnect between the ideal and the actual process where citizenship relies on paperwork rather than effort. This book's definition relies more on citizenship from history based on official notation. Producing Good Citizens connects to the mental health, good manners video through outlining what constitutes good manners, what makes people healthy in American society, how do healthy people behave, and how do we know? In Lone Star Rhetoric's Texan citizenship is defined as the experiences of those who have lived there, things that have made somewhere a Texan are the experiences that have earned them citizenship rather than being given it. Being a woman is more than about the want than the physical attributes. While claiming the bicycle mainly references the standards set by society for women, the main point of the book and the bicycle is to show how varied the forms of women are. Thank you. Well, thank you. Okay. So thank you guys for getting us started. Next time we will wrap up with citizen robots.
Yes, that's going to be great.
And I think we have 8. Something like that. Let's see. I think we have 5 more people next time. Ooh. So okay, all right. So any questions or thoughts about the midterm before you go out, Katrina, or when we start talking about the final project?
Not at this time.
Okay, well then that's the only time you get to ask us. Window closed. All right, so actually let me do this first. I'm going to look at, so last time we just had this optional workshop because you guys were doing that. And next time we're going to be talking about this book, A History of Multimodal Writing Pedagogy, which this one and Kelly Ritter's book on the mental hygiene films. I'm just really drawn to these ideas of old media, analog media. He's saying that this idea of asking people to write video and those kinds of things is not a new thing in his history. So, they had first-year students creating movies back in the 70s. So then we'll talk about lynching, which is such a light read. Apparently, Katrina keeps it on her nightstand. And then I just added this one. So we've done we had a lot of conversations over the last several weeks. And so I kind of like you guys to go back to those, and you guys don't have to go look at our videos, but they'll do that. We'll think about it too. But maybe eyeball what they've done, and we'll do the same. So now that we're on this side of your presentations, we've done these other readings. We've thought a lot about citizenship and oppression and systemic issues and bureaucracy and powerlessness and power and the fluidity of power and justice and money and all those happy things. So thinking about that and all of those complex things, what's some of the ideas or the topics or the conversations or the texts or contributions grabbed your attention? I'm thinking way back, I did look at some of these early conversations, and looking at for at least a couple of weeks, we were just really compelled and drawn and interested in Brian's tattoos, or arm pictures, or whatever you call them in your things later.
Pictures on my arm.
Archives.
Yes, our arm archives, arm archives, yeah.
Yes.
And archives.
Archives.
That's the Easter egg for today. And some of the recurring themes that you guys are seeing, I know that you guys looked for those as you were creating your midterm projects. What are some other things that come forward with that? Think about as you go back through too, not just citizenship rhetorics, which I see and from your presentations, and I thought the same thing a lot, is that in citizenship there seems to be a lot of power enacted upon you,
and in activist rhetorics, you're specifically doing pushback against the injustices that are going on. And so what form does that take? And in Kate's book, it takes the form of teaching. But are there, what is activism and on whose behalf and via what mechanisms? I would argue that in Claiming the Bicycle, for example, the women involved are definitely practicing activist rhetoric. Other examples of activist rhetoric in what we've read?
In the era, specifically the church, the role of the church, I would consider activist, because they were, and it goes way back to like medieval notions of sanctuary, is probably where this came from. But when they couldn't write themselves, paraphrasing, it's close to what she says, when they couldn't write themselves into the state, they wrote themselves into the church as a way to circumvent the bureaucratic nightmare that they had to try to deal with just to stay.
Yeah. The church has a long history in all sorts of histories of doing this. I mean, this was the cooking place for the whole civil rights movement through the Black Freedom movement in America. I mean, the Bible is subversive. Jesus is subversive. So yeah, thinking of that. And then I know that we're already making keywords. I mean, I was making some keywords as you guys were doing your presentations of how you saw citizenship rhetoric, and we're looking at like things like shared and belonging and language and paper and place and body and like the materiality of citizenship, power, money, other things. So what's coming up, and maybe there are questions that are worthy of further exploration on your part. So I'd ask you guys, you looked at some documents, and you did some analyses of that. You may have said off the cuff some kind of a personal archive that you thought interesting that we didn't quite know what to do about it, but we were just like early on talking about what's your experience with archives. Maybe you have like a scrapbook or something that you hadn't really thought of. Abigail spoke about those letters between herself and her friend that she's had throughout most of their lifetime. So going back to that, what still sparks your interest? Kendall and the oral histories of the Korean War, or are there other things that spin off of that? What questions do you find interesting? Were there a further exploration? Maybe with respect to your final project, you don't have to be thinking in terms of that, though I'm going to try to spark some ideas on that. And what kinds of topics in general are of interest to you? Women's rights, public memorials. Brian had shared that, what is it, the Peace of the World Trade Center?
Peace of the North Tower.
That was...
Now, when I left, I haven't been gone that long, been here probably 17 months now. Honestly, I'd lost track of what a monument it turned into, because for a while it was just a hunk of a building in front of Town Hall. When it showed up, none of us had any idea. What is this doing here? It looked like someone just airlifted garbage, because it literally was, none of us knew what it was, and then it would go on to be, and when I said out loud in class and I got home, I said, that sounds like crazy. Like my little stuff that has nothing to do with like New York City. Like I'm closer to Philly than New York City by a good bit. And so I went back to the town website to find out if I could figure out why we had part of the North Tower. And it turned out that my town had a good amount of first responders living. And it had ties that I didn't even know it had. Because of distance. Like I didn't know people were routinely commuting that far to go to work, because the north part, Bergen, where my family's from, where I was born, that's all a New York City suburb. There's in Westwood, where my mother lived, there's a train station spitting distance from my uncle's house, and it just goes into the city. That's like the stop. So that whole area. So it made sense if it was there, but to be so far, like to be housed in the area where people from New York come for vacation, didn't make sense at all. And then when I looked at it closer, it does, in fact, have a reason for being there.
Mm. We didn't talk a lot about public memorials, but there's so much interesting stuff to do and say and read and explore surrounding public memorials. I mean, I'm old enough to have very clear memory of the Oklahoma City bombing, and I was there a couple of years after the bombing, before the memorial went up, and we walked around just a chain link fence that was, you know, woven with teddy bears and flowers and letters and so forth. But much more recently, we can all think about the rhetorical machinations that surrounded our attempts to explore what the hell we were going to do with this now empty space where there used to be the twin towers.
Yeah.
And you know, the sheer terror amongst, and no pun intended, amongst the people who were horrified that there'd be any consideration of putting a mosque there. Yeah, just the whole of it. I mean, and then of course more recently the Civil War monuments and memorials, and those and their interesting, really complex history, and all the rhetoric through which we people have worked to make the argument for now they're going to get rid of all of our history, forgetting the fact that these things were erected. They're just basically tin, and you can see a big explosion of them at major moments of when there's seems to be some movement for justice on the part of African Americans. There are a bunch of monuments pop up.
We talked about that in relation to Columbus Day, justice class. And I said this at the time, and I'll say it again for a different recording so they get me twice on record of saying this. Phoebe, a monument by itself is a celebration. By constructing a monument, it's not a monument against something. That's just not.
Well, right, but
they're laudable. So I suggested putting red paint on everybody's hands, because someone said, should we put blood on the hands? I said, yes, get red paint. I'll go do it. Let's do that, because I'm not opposed
on the monuments.
Yeah, because I'm not opposed to. It's not preserving accurate.
Right.
It's not preserving what happened.
Right.
In any way. It's celebrating an alternate history. And it goes back to that you're allowed to have your own opinions, not allowed to have your own facts.
Right.
We know what happened.
Yeah, the Snickerdoodle controversy.
Right, completely divorced to the fact that these came up during Jim Crow. And
Right.
These came up to
Reconstruction, yeah.
100 years later, right? It, completely divorced to that. It just, that's not what a monument is.
And the people who are putting it up are definitely, I doubt they're saying, you're right, down with the black man. No, you're right. They're saying, you know, our heritage, right? Our who we are, you know, the lost cause, you know. That all of that's being obliterated.
It was when the war ended. Separation, it's over.
And the economic collapse. I mean, wherever you stand on the issue of race, when you're a poor man or woman in the South, even if you've never owned a slave or never know anybody who owns a slave, you're not picking up a gun probably because you're racist, maybe. I mean, society, but probably because, you know, your entire town economy is going to collapse if that farm up the road shuts down, because the only money cycling through is for that cotton.
It's just a very short, it's like flying the IRA flag in Britain. It's just like, the Confederate flag, Confederate monuments. It's like flying the flag of the Irish Republican Army in Britain. That's what it's like doing. It's no difference.
Yeah. The other thing, in terms of,
on the same flagpole with the British flag, because you'll see that. You'll see American flag, 50 stars, and then you'll see Confederate flag. It's like, well, no, those two things can't exist together. The one wanted to leave, they wanted to take half those stars and go.
That's right.
It's just a fact that, all the monuments you can feel like they're about what you want, but in point of fact, it's about taking half those stars and leaving. And that's it.
In
Right.
his who
Reasons
controls
notwithstanding.
right? Who controls the facts? Who controls the
Putting the
story?
British flag and the American flag underneath it too.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
they left.
Yeah, wait a minute. No, that was about us going, no, we
Yeah.
want to call it. Someone said on
Doesn't
the
make
news
sense.
yesterday or today about booing the president. He
Mhm.
said, no, the whole point of America is that we're allowed to boo the president. Like, that's what we went to that baseball game.
Mhm. Yeah.
We left to do, I mean, I know that's not really, and there's when you look
Well, no, I mean,
But
but real doesn't matter in
Yeah.
rhetoric. It's about, I mean, it doesn't, right? It's just about how meaning is constructed, right? And who has power to, and in what ways is meaning being constructed. I mean, how successful is this argument for heritage? You know, it's a pretty strong one. And it's hard to pull apart because it's difficult for anyone who's invested in that legacy to understand that it comes anywhere close to being incredibly oppressive and responsible for a lot of death and carnage.
And I mean, like to bring that to now, when we talked about this in 1301, the child detention centers, I frame that whole as this is what our government is doing. Like, I can't separate myself. Like, these are my representatives and what they're doing in my, like, as far as the rest of the world is concerned, I'm just as on the hook for this as everybody else. It doesn't matter who you voted for. This is what they're doing in your name.
Yep.
So you can't, in my opinion, separate yourself from the actions of the government just because you voted a different way.
No.
Like, you have to take a different type of action to come to be on the other side of that.
Right. Yeah, no, responsible. And also, and the other thing is too, looking at, so one of the reasons why I'm so interested in these old films, these mental hygiene films too, but we're looking at some super old Superman cartoons, and my husband's so into Superman. But this one was the first time that I had ever heard any reference to the Japanese internment camps, which I did not know about until I was an adult. They were not teaching us this in the 80s and during the Cold War. Did you know? Were they teaching you guys in school?
I think I found out about it like in my art class, but I was doing an art project and I was looking for Japanese history, and I found a book on Manzanar, and the Japanese. So,
Return to Manzanar, is that it?
Yes, that's it. So I think that's how I found it. I don't remember specifically going into detail.
It was part of the curriculum for you, Brian?
I had a high school teacher, history teacher, after 9/11, wrote on one of my essay tests that until 9/11, the biggest single terrorist act was the Oklahoma City bombing, and he wrote the death toll. I mean, my education was like
activism through the margins.
Everybody was new. Everybody was. All my teachers were young. They had just the luck of like someone, and then we had a sub who ended up staying the whole time. And I just kept ending up on the right side of the schedule. And we knew about it. We knew this stuff because we were told about it.
Were you guys, was Japanese internment?
No, we weren't taught about Japanese internment camps. Matter of fact, we weren't even told about the internment camps here in Texas. I believe Crystal City is one. The one in Seagoville, I knew nothing about it until I started teaching high school students English. And I said Return to Manzanar. It's Farewell to Manzanar by Wakatsuki Houston. Brought up internment camps. So then we started researching internment camps, and there were some here right there in Seagoville. And so it amazes the children when, you point out to them that just right here, this was happening right here. It's now a prison, but
that's interesting, isn't it?
Yes. So if it serves as a prison now and it's the same building, what makes you think internment was just a matter of names?
Yeah. And the ways in which we think about or don't think about things that exist in our world, things that exist, events that exist in our world, that's the power of rhetoric, right? I mean, how are these I mean, are there any monuments associated with what happens if we go, Kiki Hempelman, our German computational linguistics professor, was really interested to see that there were some German POW camps around. And there are signs for them, right?
Mhm.
I know he went and walked around, it was like just dirt. There's really nothing that frames it that way. We do have signs that say, hey, it's over there, though. We had prisoners of war here. That apparently is not difficult to construct rhetorically, but there are no signs pointing to Japanese and German camps. And there's really no monuments associated with it. So yeah, it's like how are these things constructed, and who has the
Just looked up the word inter to confine or impound, especially during a war.
Children in cages.
And this is a little thing you might play with if you wanted to do what words mean, because the word it reminds me of, it's not the same word, but inter.
To bury.
Yeah. They're very close. They're written.
To bury, to cover over, to
To place corpse and grave a tomb.
that's
so there
interesting.
might be some etymology. Yeah, things mean everything, real words and meanings.
He's down to just a 1000 now.
But they might have a similar root. They might come from a similar, because they're very close.
And as you guys were doing, I mean, what you're doing was rhetorical analysis and finding what you understand or think that citizenship rhetoric means, how it happens. That's definitely what you guys were doing. And some things just don't exist except rhetorically. And so, yeah, so how do we see that? Let's see. What would it look like? So, and other little things that pop up as I think about the moment, and this as a young high school teacher, I'm just sick that I did this. But because I've always felt like a progressive and so forth, but I'd always thought the Emancipation Proclamation was about slavery. I mean, of course I did. Of course I did. And so, bought my they call it teacher's edition of my textbook for my sophomore lit course included Emancipation Proclamation, and it told me specifically that it absolutely was not about slavery. It had nothing to do with slavery. They did not at all point to all of the letters of secession that came from all of the states that say specifically about owning people and their need to. But I told them, my question was, what is it? What is it about? What is it not about? I don't know if I said this, but I specifically taught them this horrible thing because my textbook told me that that's what I was supposed to do. And I thought, that's really odd. It seems like it should be about slavery. But I mean, I guess it isn't. We didn't really study it in school. I didn't know anything about it.
It only applied to the now seceded. It applied to now seceded states. It didn't have jurisdiction anymore in the eyes of the people who it applied to.
They're meaningless too.
Keep
Yeah.
the French from helping us out.
And so you're right. I mean, in terms of like what you're saying, in terms of like who want, what do monuments? I need to put a pin in how the Holocaust is framed in Germany. But when you're talking about the Civil War monument and how those are erected, and the idea of painting the hands red, or other people have said to line up alternative history and also put a pin in the Greenville sign and its place in the museum is how do you counter stories?
Like that little woman statue, that little girl they put in front of the pole in New York City.
Yeah.
Was a nice, do stuff like that. That was a nice touch.
That's great. Those things that they erect. Yeah. But I think I might have told you guys this before, but I'll say it again. The sign that about the one that hung over the Main Street in Greenville from 1921. I think the first parade was KKK going down the main street. They started at the Welcome to Greenville, Blackest Land, Whitest People, and that hung until the late 60s, and NAACP got involved. They took it down. People still believe that it was there. I mean, people have memories of it still being there
understand it was on stationery. I know it was painted on a water tower. So where's the sign? I gave a presentation this summer at the Audie Murphy Museum, and I've asked about the sign before, and it's upstairs. It's in the attic. They don't know what to do with it. They can't bring it out because everybody says, and they said at my presentation, that did also include just such a passive mention of the sign. And, everybody, I expected more pushback because mostly people who come to those kinds of presentations about local history kind of, usually elderly long-term residents of this. There were some pretty animated, really fascinating people were, pushing back. But this really sweet lady said, I really appreciate what you've been saying about, and your movie was really, really interesting and good. I gotta say that. But, people just always mention that sign. And she and her friends say, I know. She said, it just doesn't mean what everybody says it means. It just means nice. That's what the dictionary says. Why just means nice. And I said, thank you. And Susan Stewart was there, bless her. She'd never heard that. She was just like, what? What? I can't tell you how many layers of racism that is. Yes, Susan, I know. You know, we both know. This is not the place to litigate that.
Yes, it is.
And I mean, how far are we going to get? And then, I got this grant from the Humanities Texas to do a documentary about the sign because there's some anti-racist work going on that is aligned with the sign. It's a little tiny one that you'll see, welcome to Greenville, an inclusive community. That this group that's led by a lawyer who's trying to go back and litigate the lynching that took place in the late 1800s in Greenville. So really neat stuff's happening. I thought we could talk about the sign. Apparently we can't because everybody says the same thing. So the framing of that is impossible. Rhetorically, it's impossible to talk about it. Actually having any real movement on that, there are other fights to fight. That's going to stay up in the attic. I don't know when it's going to come out. But finally, another rhetorical thing, when this all this monument stuff was going on in America, people were calling our attention to the ways in which Germany's handled the Holocaust. And thank you. So what do you guys know about Germany's treatment of the Holocaust?
The only thing I know recently, and I mentioned it, they were using VR and AR to reconstruct the ruins of the camps to prosecute people who were guards who said they couldn't have seen what happened. So they were able to, I think that was the Atlantic. Let's see if I can find it and bring it back in. They're still prosecuting to this day. This was when we have that spring digital humanities. Yeah. They're still well, it's like 100. Yeah. It's just low level people left, but they're still, as they can prove, and they used a reconstruction of what the towers would have looked like and where he would have been standing as a guard. So to say he didn't know they were being led into gas tubes was a lie. So they convicted this 100-something-year-old man on his part that he played in it.
That's digital rhetoric, man. Yeah. Making a difference.
Every so often I hear about that, like this 80-something prosecuted, like they were their guard or something. It's like steadily.
All the way out. Yeah. Yeah.
But isn't it arguable that after all these years, they could have just totally really changed their perspective of the other? And at this point, isn't it moot?
Isn't it what?
Moot.
What, the prosecution?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just sitting here thinking about a 100-year-old man. We're prosecuting him. What are we going to do? Prosecute him and send him home?
Yeah.
I mean, I understand it. Don't get me wrong. I do understand what happened was wrong. Everybody was wrong in it. But even some of those, like, low-level people did they really have the power to say, I want to do something different because so many other forces were forcing their hands?
Or we just talked about the poor banner during the Civil War. Yeah.
I hear that all the time in reference to this administration. That, you don't have to enact the policies. If it's a violation of law, obviously, or if it's a violation of your personal moral code, you could resign and protest. Now, it's not a one-to-one in Nazi Germany, but that took time. It wasn't initially, there were several points at which you could have got out if you saw the direction the country was heading.
But so few did, though.
What?
So few did see the direction it was heading.
I know, and it's easy.
It was good propaganda.
It's good, yeah, and a scary time, and somebody's got to be the enemy, and when leadership is that charismatic, I mean, it's the propaganda is again rhetoric,
Sure.
And then also I think it's rhetoric again, Katrina, to say, well, I mean, what does it mean to prosecute?
That government has to be seen as still distancing itself after all this time.
Yeah.
So if there's anyone left to the Nuremberg, the high profile stuff has been done for a long time.
Yeah.
But I think, and I'm not German, so I don't know how they feel about it, but as a country, I still feel like in America, we come out and we make that apology, like it was during the Clinton administration that they apologized for Tuskegee, and that's it. But they're still prosecuting. They want to be seen, at least in some circles, as still accounting for it.
Yeah. Well, and so yes, we have that, and we've got it was against the law to celebrate any aspect of the Nazi regime in Germany. Full stop. The minute that all the things were signed, there won't be any monument to it because the law prohibited it. But the nuance of some of what happened is clearly etched into the landscape because just the atrocity involved. So how do we handle it? How do they handle it? What do we do with it? The side by side kind of both sides of history need to be heard.
Well, see, I do think that I've heard that I've never been to Germany, but just from friends who have been to Germany, that there are no Nazi monuments like we have here with Southern leaders being displayed. I mean, even like I was watching one of those old videos. Is it the Praegler?
Oh yeah, yeah.
I was watching an old yes, that one. I was watching an old video, and it was one that was used in school, and it was talking about the stately Southern plantations. Oh my gosh! I was like, okay, I'm just good for the white people, but I didn't hear anything about the black people. It mentioned, I think they mentioned the slaves as having less wealth or something like that. It was interesting. Yeah. So it was just kind of glossed over for the slaves, but the whole celebration was about the glorious South and the monuments to the glorious South. Now, I think that is an interesting difference that Germany has versus us, and I guess in America it's just like after Reconstruction, it's like, okay, our story is going to prevail, and it did. And when we had recently the discussions here in the Dallas area about the monuments to Jefferson Lee, I found an article, a newspaper article, and some minutes from a meeting, John Tyler Lee, a school that my high school played. We were in the same district, and about how the students felt attending school, going out on the football field to, oh gosh, that Southern song. I can't think of the name of it now.
But there are several. I can't come to mind either, but yes.
But it's a very popular song. If it rings in my head, I'll let you know. But going out to that song, and I think it was like a tribute to Lee, that made them feel terrible. And there was bars and stripes all over. Bars and stripes hung outside the front of the school. And, you know, this was at integration. And they're saying, well, if we have to go here, can't there be something that reflects us and not a reminder of the bondage of our ancestors? And in the 50s, we're like a generation or two away, a generation and a half away from, or 2 generations away from slavery. So,
Yeah.
I mean, it's a very big reminder.
Right. No, exactly.
Well, that's what we do. I mean, we gloss over it while we're doing it, and then when it stops, we pretend like it didn't happen.
Dixieland.
That's okay.
What was it?
Dixieland.
Oh, okay.
In Dixieland, I'll take my stand. Way down south in Dixie.
It's a fun one too. Dance, dance, dance.
And I danced to it. I learned dances to it growing up
Never
in my interracial school.
Yep. Yeah.
I was just saying that the different, like, we never, like, when Reconstruction or when the Civil War ended, we don't pass laws like that. We want to pick up and move on like it didn't just happen. And another with the child detention stuff. I mean, are those kids back with their parents?
Yeah.
We don't know.
And
That's over. It just stopped. Like, we stopped talking about
They don't know where the paperwork is. They don't even know how
There
to
never
get them
was
together.
paperwork.
I mean, there's like, who? I don't know where the parent who belongs to this kid is. I don't know who it is.
It
who
was
this
like
kid
3
is.
seconds of public outrage, and then it was like, it just because we're not covering it anymore, we're still very much doing it. We're
That's
still
right.
very much dealing with
That's
it.
right.
But you wouldn't know it anymore. You'd
That's
think
right.
it was over.
That's right. That's
And
right.
And this is a repeat of the past.
Yes, that's because we don't
This
recognize.
is-
That's the thing. Whenever you talk about it, and we say we have to have a dialogue, we have to address this. We don't. We
Yeah.
run screaming in the other direction. Like we just, and it's over. We don't want to talk about it because people will get upset.
Yeah. Yeah.
Native American children were separated from their parents and sent to Catholic schools, boarding schools, yes.
Reservations to this day, conditions and reservations are abominable.
Yeah.
To this day, right now, currently.
Yeah.
I mean, spotty power, spotty access, plumbing issues, and trying to vote as it right.
And some real challenges in terms of sex trafficking and so forth because of who has the jurisdiction and the resources to oversee. People are disappearing. Women are just disappearing. And there's a desire to put intentionality in front of any sort of heinous act, right? I mean, and also to think, because I think intentionality, like I definitely would never have clicked that on switch for the gas chambers. I just wouldn't have. I would have made a stand. Would I have? You know?
Oh, you're talking about those
Yeah.
experiments?
Yeah, I mean, right,
Sociological
exactly.
stuff?
Just, I'm talking about that experiment.
Okay.
I was talking about being, if I were in Nuremberg and I were one of the
Well,
soldiers,
that's- yeah,
but yes,
we
the
tried.
same
Yeah,
thing.
but that's related to that college
Yes,
experiment,
that's exactly
right?
what this is.
Yeah, because the title of the study in the book that I read, the sociology book, was if somebody asked you to kill someone, would you do it? The answer is probably yes. And they pressured students to do these in colleges, the prison experiments and stuff,
The Stanford
all this
experiment.
stuff you can't do anymore. But they used to re-engineer tests that were meant to pressure people into really hurting, if not outright killing somebody. So they would, if they got a question wrong, you had to shock them, and then they would up the voltage every time. The person on the other side of the glass was never actually being shocked. They were acting like they were. And people's reactions was what they were interested in studying, whether or not they would do it, whether they were happy to do it. The prison experiment was a different one where they gave people the role of you're an inmate and you're a guard. And once they were given the appearance, this artificial power over another human being, they just became these
Monsters.
oppressive. Yes, absolutely. To the point where that study at the time, when there were no rules to dictate this stuff, was called off by those people. So it must have been so bad that even then they were like, no, we can't do this. And this is before IRB. This is why we have IRB.
You know, it's recently I learned that this is a documentary about the Stanford experiment. The lead researcher saw this going on, just horrible torture and not letting them sleep and just
bananas business, never taking their shades off. You know, they're just always wearing this, so I guess they can't interact with them as human beings. As a scientist, he thought, this is fascinating. And he brought his girlfriend and said, check this out. And she said, no.
Yeah.
Something really evil and is happening right now. Can't you see it? Okay, let me take my scientist glasses off, put my human being glasses on. Oh my God, shut it down. What have I done? so yeah, the same thing. And so, yeah, and that's just, the hell is that? I don't know.
This is why the guard was the guard and didn't.
Yeah, exactly. Or I mean, is the authority telling us what to do and we do it? I mean, in that case, right, they weren't afraid of their families being, you know, killed or whatever. And I guess if I were a low-level soldier, I might be. But you know, how do things mean anything? And as rhetoricians, our concern is not necessarily what the psychological thing is that clicks on or off the thing that makes us humans. But rather the ways in which that framing gives it meaning, you know? I'm able to do this because I guarantee there has never been a point in history, and it is true right now, and Brian just mentioned it too. People are going to look at us 50 years from now, and we're going to be doing some abominable things. I mean, I already know some of the things that we're doing that are just horrific, and I can't imagine anybody what monsters would do. But there are also things that I'm certain I'm complicit in. We all are. We can't not be. And it's just the power of hindsight that allows us to think that history is progressive and that, well, sure glad I'm not those ding-dongs that were around there in the World War, you know, during the Civil War. Whew, thank God. But I am the one who was raised in a world where I never learned a damn thing about the Reconstruction except that it was, you know, I don't know what else to say, but a shit show that the carpetbaggers brought down and tried to turn everybody against us rather than actually making some headway and getting African American leadership in place. And anyway, all of that's rhetoric too. So let's go back to now that we shocked everybody.
Now that everyone's back.
We got the Stanford experiment on fly and all that. Let's see.
I was going to say one thing.
Yeah.
Like, we were talking about like Germany and World War II. One thing that I noticed looking at Japan, that side of it, when I lived in Japan and visited Japan, one of the controversies that happened was that the Prime Minister would often visit the Yasukuni Shrine, which is a shrine to the World War II soldiers, or people would say, you know, war criminals, and that stirred up a lot of like animosity in China and Korea and protests, like destroying Japanese businesses because this leader of the nation is visiting this shrine dedicated to these war criminals that have been convicted. And it's like the contrast between Germany, which is like seeing itself as like always, you know, we have to keep, you know, keep this going. We have to have the trials. We have to, you know, this is part of who we are. Where in Japan, you've got the leader visiting shrine for them, the shrine that was that emperor's shrine, or served that emperor during World War II. Those war criminals. It's like it's a different. I don't know. I kept seeing that contrast between Germany and Japan.
So interesting. So interesting, and a very different relationship to that history in the same.
Fascinated to know the Russian perspective on that because they switched sides.
Yeah.
They
No, but I knew that. I thought they were always allies.
No, they were part of the Axis.
When the first one, and then run into the second one, yeah.
Until we were starting to.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And you're like, oh, okay.
Wait a minute.
Let's switch it. Let's switch it up.
Yep.
Because he did need that territory. Yeah.
He could have just stayed still.
Yeah.
He could have just resigned.
Yeah. Okay, so with all of these ideas in mind, so some of you guys know where you want to start your project. Your final project for this can be, and I'm going to go to the end here because I want to just think of this visually. See that? Whoa, that doesn't look good. That's just arrows. Picture that as just arrows.
No, I kind of thought it was 4 chairs on a rug.
Okay, yeah, that could be too. But the idea here is that your annotated bibliography, rather than shutting down and closing in on a possible project that you can pursue in a thesis-driven way in the very near future, is an option, but it isn't at all the direction that it needs to go. The annotated bibliography can just be to sort of get a feel for how people have dealt with this thing directly. What have ever others written about the monument to in remembrance of those lost during the Oklahoma City bombing. So what have others written about that one? My starting point, my interest in that movement from the chain link fence that I saw to the actual monument. Or it can be indirect. What have others written about things kind of like my starting point? Maybe not this memorial, but maybe the 9/11 memorial, or maybe memorials in other countries, as we were talking about. Or it could be entirely adjacent to that, still further. So what have people written about? Well, that's not just a terrorism. What have people written about acts of terrorism as they're taught in schools? What have people written about? How have people framed previous moments that we now, in retrospect, only call them acts of terror? I mean, all of it. Or is it like maybe they're not looking at this particular place or memorials at all, but they are looking at, and I'll talk about this later, Eiffel Tower and its construction within the context of the World's Fair. So, these monuments that definitely have something to tell us about the ways in which they want that particular city and it's that particular country at that particular point in history. And I just finished reading The Devil in the White City. Oh, so good. It's about both the serial killer that was happening at the same time they were also building and creating and celebrating the World's Fair in Chicago in 1893, and how one frames what our city means in a relationship to the rest of the world. So maybe that, or and then whatever it is, always minding those direct. So maybe my bibliography includes all of those things, goes all of those different bizarre directions. So if you don't have something you're really excited about sitting on and trying, then you can start there. So starting with artifact, an event, a people, a person, an era, or if you do have like a question that you have some thinking. I think Abigail said early on, what did women's sports mean at the turn of the previous century in rural Texas? There were organized teams, so what's that mean? So you can start again, as I said, like with this generic category of artifact, monuments, or a specific artifact, the monument to the Oklahoma City bombing, or, and you get a little bit more and more specific, like a category of cookbooks. We said that there was the largest cookbook collection in the nation is TW. I just learned from this guy who does incredible work, Harry Denny. He's at St. John's, is he still? I think he is. In Queer Rhetorics, said that one of the most significant LGBTQ archives is at UNT. I had no idea. But so looking at cookbooks in general, what have people done in this field, and maybe also fields related to it, and maybe if it's not even rhetoric, and I'll talk about that in a second, or maybe you're really interested in what
something a little bit more specific, family cookbooks in mid-century America, or like family cookbooks compiled by women's groups in rural Midwest, or family cookbooks compiled by suffragettes, and whatever, because who's that compiled for? And we just talked also about the role of recipes in families. Are we going to drill down still further? I'm thinking about Angela's project with with that specific particular issue of Better Homes and Gardens, that particular cake recipe that had this particular relationship in her history, in her family history, and so drilling on down that. So if she started there, then she could not necessarily drill down further to learn more about that recipe within that family, though that's interesting. But for this annotated bibliography, she could look at cookbooks. She could look at she's looking at racial elements too, because we've got cross-class and cross-racial kinds of relationships going on. So all those different directions. People, an event, as I said, the World's Fair, or an era. So if you decide a place where you want to start, then what do you do? So you guys know where you want to start. Do you have an idea, Katrina?
I don't know. I keep thinking about nostalgia.
Mm-hmm.
And looking at how we recall things, mm-hmm. and maybe even across time.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. Do you have, I guess one interesting artifact that would be a neat starting place is that Pralinger archive film you just mentioned about the way, that film, I guess, was probably created in the 40s, the 50s. Mm-hmm. And it was about how we remember the Civil War, yeah, and it's nostalgic, and it's glamorous, and yeah.
We do that to this day with World War II. That's the source of so many movies. They still make video games sourced in World War II and I think the reason for that is, from the American perspective, it's one of the clearest good guy, bad guy situations. Like, there's little room for alternate interpretation of what happened. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying there's none. I'm saying there's little room in America for,
you're so right, and also it's just so interestingly complex. I was floored when I went to the Holocaust Museum in DC, and we didn't give ourselves enough time for it, but the last part of time that I spent was at this, have you guys been to the Holocaust Museum? So, I'm sure you've been to one, but this particular one, two things happened. One, when I was the last year taught high school in 95, and then this one. So that bank of phones, what it was I don't know if I guess they were recreations of phone calls of family members and people who were suffering under the Nazi occupation, calling America desperately, get involved, help us. People are dying because we were so damn slow to get involved. We screwed up. I never crossed my mind that we didn't do anything but be fabulous.
It's still doing business on both sides.
Exactly.
Yeah, I know that.
But we don't know that. That's not public memory.
Yeah. So that's,
well, it's like when they I can't remember when it was. There was a ship that the president turned away from port, mm-hmm. and all of those, I don't know if all, but many of those immigrants ended up dying because he didn't act.
Yeah.
That's not that. What I didn't learn that from my education. Mm-hmm. I learned it from researching as an adult to teach my students, finding things for them to read.
Yeah. So when the last year I taught 8th grade, they read Diary of Anne Frank, and we looked at this beautiful book of
MS
art.
Lewis. That was the boat we turned away.
How many people?
900 Jewish refugees
who
escaped the Holocaust, denied permission to land.
What year was that?
so they were steeped in this, and they had just they also looked at a book of art that was created by children with
39.
the supplies that were available for the Holocaust, and we didn't get involved for another 2 years. I think it's 41, 42. We didn't get involved.
I'm going to tell you the name of that book because I've taught out of it too. I never saw
I'd love to
another
know.
butterfly.
Was it?
I never saw another butterfly.
Another butterfly. Oh my gosh, yes. That's just so beautiful. My cousin teaches middle school now, and I didn't realize that was the same book because
I taught it in high school.
oh, you
I
did?
used it when we covered the I taught English too, so it's all about persuasion.
Mhm.
And I used that one. We talked about shifts, but then we got more into the meat of it, probably deeper into the inferencing. What exactly are they talking about?
That's it. So yeah, no, I didn't know any of this the other thing I didn't know was we just had this whole unit on the Holocaust and Frank and all of this stuff, and brought the students into the Holocaust Museum in Dallas, and it was powerful and it was moving. And at the end, we watched this VCR, the videotape of a portion of a documentary. It was all, those of you guys who have any memory of watching a video, it had been replayed enough to be slack. And she clicked that off and she said, "And don't let anyone ever tell you that it didn't happen." I'm like, whoever says that? I'd never ever heard of a Holocaust denier in my life. I had no idea what she was saying, and I wouldn't know for many months until I'm just baffled. So all of this, it's very clear now too. But to go back to what Brian was saying in terms of like the rhetorical construction of public memory surrounding World War II. I mean, we call that the Greatest Generation, right? Unambiguously, you're so right. That's the story. Good guys, bad guys.
We got it in 41 after Pearl Harbor.
Okay. Oh, that's
Started
fun.
in 39.
That makes
Yeah.
So 2 years. I didn't know.
And even the numbers, I mean, the number you hear is 6 million, because that's the number of Jewish deaths, but that's not the number of deaths, closer to 11 million. The Holocaust forgotten victims, 5 million non-Jewish, so 6 and 5 is 11.
The gays,
Right. Yeah, well, that's...
the gays, the mentally challenged, the people with disabilities.
And this isn't to disparage
No.
separating that 6 million out, but it is to say it's a stronger case to put all the victims together and make that number what it was 11, which is bigger than 6 in every single accounting of numbers.
It's true. It's true. And again, what's right is important, I think. But in terms of rhetoric, it's just like how did that story end up being the ones, and what mechanisms were used to give it that persuasive force that the Holocaust has become such an element in our imagination, and then Japan's relationship with it is different as well. So,
which is also still funny to me, because like the way Japan and the U.S. are as close as they are now, like we have right twice. Yeah, once wasn't enough. And now this is, I don't know. I had heard that they'd already surrendered. This was not necessary action.
I've heard that too. I don't know.
I can't cite that, but I have heard that this was just totally like, we didn't even need to go that far. But did it not only once, but twice, and after the fact, which is total grounds to not want to be a friend forever. Like that's, but we're very close, and that's an attitude I can't account for.
Yeah, it's baffling, and so to go back several weeks ago when we were talking about what does it mean to think from that perspective and within that time, we can get at some artifacts that enable us to do that. How at the time the relationship with that was, and how we recreate our relationship over time, rhetorically. But recently, I and somehow into our feed
some early news clips from ABC of sort of feed in, and most recently it was earliest reports of Chernobyl, which is that 86? Does that sound right? So the full height of the Cold War, I graduated in '89. It was everything was about. I mean, we still were doing nuclear bomb,
86.
Duck and cover kinds of things in the hallway stuff. And I mean, oh gosh, I would love for somebody to study the rhetoric surrounding the day after. For those of you guys who aren't old enough to have seen that, we're in the middle of the fact that we think that they're going to drop a bomb on us at any point, and this movie is watched by everyone on a TV called The Day After about exactly what happens if we were wiped out.
Is that the British film?
No, it might be the wrong one. It's a made-for-TV one that's American.
Okay.
Was TV One the channel that was shown in school? Was that like what we'd watch in the mornings? I know we used to have a TV channel that we watched in class in school, and we'd watch it in the morning, and it would give us some global news, world news. Is that what that is?
Yeah, no. This was a movie for the general public that had an introduction by some national news crew. I don't know what it was associated with.
ABC. ABC.
Oh, what is it called?
The Day After. So the story of a handful of people in and around Lawrence, Kansas, who had the misfortune of surviving in all that nuclear war to the U.S. and Soviet Union.
It was terrifying. And so Cold War rhetoric, so talking about, so what are we going to study? Okay, let's look at this film, maybe, and how it constructs the Cold War and the terror associated with that, and how it constructs who the bad guys are and who the good guys are, and how it might be problematic in some ways, and how maybe it might be,
Yes, even now, The Day After remains TV's highest-rated movie, supplanting its 1978 primetime airing of Gone with the Wind.
Get out! That's fascinating. That's interesting.
That's The Post. That's not just some fly-by-night operation.
The Post, dang. So that could be a place. Your Pralinger archive film. The reasons rhetorically I was so interested in the two clips that showed what was happening in the moment with Chernobyl is we get the first clip that says that because you remember they want their narrative controlled and we want our narrative controlled, right? And this nuclear power thing is like, this is a big damn deal that they're doing that. They're the future. And this little, oh my gosh, let's control this. Oh, we can't. So what I'm looking at is a clip of what we saw as we were starting to see it before any historians had gotten to it. So how was Russia, the Soviet Union then constructing that at the time, and what were they laying out? What were we getting to? And the second one, they had a little bit of a flyover, and what they were reporting back to us on the national news in America was reports of how the story was being told on the ground in Russia, because we were looking at their news clips, and they were saying that they waited until the end of the broadcast this is just like one 5-minute clip. They waited until the very end of the broadcast in Russia to tell them about this Chernobyl. This is how they explained what's happening. This is how all we know. But anyway, so rhetoric. So that movie, that newscast, what are you thinking about for the final project? More robots?
Maybe more robots.
I mean, just that birth certificate is an artifact with which to begin a study that could include any of the books that we've dealt with, any of the things that we've dealt with in terms of that.
And I was trying to connect it to for dissertation stuff like Japan. And so phones, but phones in Japan, or robots, and
no, all of that. In fact, you can pull all the way back to just technology. But yeah, I think so too. Or how technology shapes us. What were you thinking again in terms of the phones? I know that. Well, actually, it's starting with that one artifact in our archives, right?
And mannerisms with the phone, like a certain period of time, like that was the 20s, and so maybe that era, and mannerisms, and how that, and a lot of the phone operators were women who did the switchboard operators. So I don't.
It would be interesting if you found a male operator during that time.
Yeah, because all the pictures I saw, it shows like female, telephone operators, but that would be interesting. So maybe something with women's studies and telephones.
Yeah, jobs, work, and it could also be, I mean, I just saw a clip this morning of one of those mental hygiene clips, but this one was put on, a lot of them are commercial ventures, and this one was put on by Bell Telephone about how to be good phone etiquette kind of thing. And it opens, and this guy's waiting for for this other businessman and some nondescript business that they're doing business stuff at, and he's watching the switchboard operator. She's great. He's just marvelous. She's great. And he says, I'm just going to steal her. And then he says, well, that wouldn't do it. And and then he sits on his desk. Well, let me tell you, that's what we had here in England, pass. This is how phone etiquette used to be, but then now it's serious. This, and so we have a 20-minute film about phone. So anyways, whatever, phone etiquette. There's also films about how to dial when we move from the switchboard into how to actually use the phone. So,
or how do you answer the phone when you're answering the phone at a residence that's not your own?
Yeah. Goes to the very top of what you just you pick the phone up now, right?
Yeah, you did.
In the 20s, whatever it is, 20.
I think so. Yeah, instead of it's no longer fashionable to just walk by the phone or think you can pick it up and not.
When I was a child, we were taught to say, if I was at my cousin's house, I'd say McClendon residence.
This is Eve.
That's right.
We were calling places, not people.
That's right.
That's true.
On the wall, you could only take the cord so far. Even if you have one of those really long cords, you still couldn't get the house. That cord was terrible. Caller ID and star 69. Phones are funny thing, right? What's the name of that archive with these movies?
Pralinger, go to archive.org, and and Pralinger Archive is one of those. So
I think that's where I found it from from that first archive list you gave us at the beginning of the semester.
Yeah,
I think it's in that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. It is. Pralinger's there. All of these films that I'm talking about probably are. They're fun, right?
And they're terrible.
And they're problematic, and they're just, and also, who's about and to what end. I think I told you guys about the film that I saw a couple of weeks ago that was about, how you homemakers should be making a budget and how many meals you have to plan and how all of them should have butter.
Always.
Because butter's a great source of calories.
Yes.
It is.
It's good.
That's true. But it was put on by the dairy industry, so surprise. So pick a thing, you're interested in the phones, technology, you can chase over time, and then our relationship with it, and that could go in a bunch of different ways. So do some research, and what the hell am I looking for? Well, it depends on where you begin. So if any of these places that you begin, if you begin with a particular research question, it's kind of easier because you're going to be pulling your keywords from that. But if you're coming at it anywhere else, then I'll have to come back to this next time. But so you guys remember that punch card I showed you? Okay, so the punch card, and I just finished, as I said, this really fascinating book about murder and the World's Fair, and the birth of the Ferris wheel. This was 1968. I discovered Hemisphere is what it was called in San Antonio, and it was near the end of the time that they were doing that. Where's my starting point? So anyway, that's what card readers look like and so forth. So if I'm going to come back, and where did I put these questions? Okay, so here to go. Okay, so what have others written about? I can get as specific as I want. What have others written about computer punch cards created to tell the future of my grandparents in Texas in 1968 in San Antonio on this machine? Of course, you're not going to go that, but I can go super indirect. So some of the things that I pulled just super quickly was The Devil in the White City is so good, but stuff that is related, but it's such
such a way that I can only think of if I close it down. This is called The Good Neighbor, Franklin Delano Roosevelt and the Rhetoric of American Power. No modern president has had so much influence on American national politics as Franklin D. Roosevelt. During FDR's administration, power shifted from the states and localities to the federal government. Within the federal government, it shifted from Congress to the president, and internationally, it moved from Europe to the United States. All of these changes required significant effort on the part of the president, who triumphed over fierce opposition and succeeded in making the American political system in ways that continue to shape our politics today. Using the metaphor of the good neighbor, producing good neighbors, Mary Ducky examines the persuasive work that took place to authorize these changes. Through the metaphor of a good neighbor, FDR's administration can be better understood. His emphasis on communal values, so this is the rhetoric, we're all in this. His treatment of friends and his delineation of enemies, so you're one of us, they're the bad guys, we're the good guys, and find the ways in which he used this rhetoric to broaden his neighborhood from the limits of the United States to encompass the entire world, laying the groundwork for American ideological dominance in the post-World War II era. So, boom. That's the rhetoric of American power. That would go in my annotated bibliography, even though it doesn't have a damn thing to do with those cards. But it does have to do with our relationship with the world as much as we can control what we look like, what's our outward facing kind of thing. And also, if you guys haven't read this, I just really love it.
Well, I think that book would go well with Vieira's book.
Okay.
The communal, there's an emphasis on communal values. The community of Fall River had shared communal values, not only through their ethnicities, but through their shared language, their shared native language. And they also had, for them, the importance of national mobilization. Mm-hmm. Papers were a vehicle for mobility, both actual mobility and, figurative mobility, being able, well, I guess it's both.
Right.
It's both pretty literal.
Yeah.
Being able to move and navigate spaces that you don't have access to if you don't have the right paper.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And who belongs and who doesn't. And he, of course, has more of the power to mark the belongers and the don't belongs. And how do we frame this? If we just let immigrants with their children come into America, then we're just saying everybody come. We're not punishing the children. We are just upholding. This is how we rhetorically construct these things, so that we can ensure that we have a particular relationship and outward-facing identity to the world beyond us. And now, of course, building on this isolationist rhetoric that is definitely against what FDR was suggesting with his good neighbor policies. Let's see. There's another one.
This is
Yeah.
an abstract question.
Oh,
but
please.
Is it, for the purposes of a final project, when I'm dealing, I'm marking a change. I'm looking at the impact post 9/11, like war rhetoric on a particular song. But I keep running into these books, and Vieira is a good example of it, where you're dealing with these topics that beg you to take a position. And it doesn't seem like the discipline's interested in taking that extra step and saying, here's what we should do. That's why I love Romeo Garcia. He's got that article, that Unmaking Gringo Centers, where he says, your writing centers are racist. Here's how they're racist. Here's how they can be a little less racist. Yeah. That last part is in the minority with what I've read.
It is.
Is that a discipline perspective?
No, it isn't. It isn't. But what you guys are
driving me crazy. Losing my mind.
So what he's looking at is not writing centers 50 years ago.
No.
So that's my world. I just and so yes, in my world, in community writing that just came out of, I do still call it rhetorical historiography our world. But when we're looking at contemporary stuff, I look at the Black Power movement specifically to find out what kinds of moves were made and which were absorbed by the
status quo and dampened, and what worked and what didn't, and what they were trying to do, specifically for lessons about what we can do now, not what they should have done then, because they should have done all sorts of shit they didn't do, but what lessons that we can take for now. And I think that's the same thing that she's looking at with claiming the bicycles. You know, what did they do then? Not what should have happened, but what did they do then that we can now do now? And activist rhetorics, what did they do then that we can learn from? And do some version of which now. How do things happen that we don't like? And how can we stop them from happening now? How do we frame what we just saw that's happening right now in terms of what's happened before, as you were saying with the cages, with the children? Done it. Mm-hmm. Well, we can think of internment. In turn, you know, we can think about it metaphorically. Think about it through this metaphor of the good neighbor. You know, we're good neighbors because we punish those who are not good to us. You're one of us. They're not. You're one of us. So that, yeah. So yes, yes and no. Not all of the people that you've been reading would consider themselves activists.
So is that it?
Potentially.
Between like a study of a moment and putting forward the information and saying this is how it was at the time versus saying here's what we're doing now and here's what we should be doing instead.
Yeah, same thing. Here's what we did then. This is the lesson we can take to for now. Here's what we're doing now, and this is what we need to be doing instead. So now change, then lessons. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But not always are Jess and Ashanka and myself are in the category of activist teacher, activist scholar. We are concerned with that. We're not just concerned with studying it. But a lot of the people that we're studying are just concerned with studying. A lot of people don't consider themselves activists; they just study activism. You don't have to.
What about Ursula Orr? Because I've listened to her talk, and in reading her book, the parallel she draws between lynching and how it was allowed, and the same thing that is occurring now with the youth, and how, like with Trayvon Martin, the law finds them justified in what they were doing. She refers to herself as a rhetorician, but yet, well, I guess that is her job, to persuade us to see those connections. Does that make her an activist?
I mean, she's doing work that allows activism. I'm not sure if she actually goes out in the streets and does this work, but also, you know, I think that it's that's another thing. Is what's rhetorical? What is it? Again, that's activist rhetoric. What does it mean to be an activist? Because I would say that the person who stays back and sticks a stamp on the letter that sends out, that helps circulate these ideas, all the people who are working behind Martin Luther King to make Martin Luther King possible as a movement. I mean, he's not a movement, you know, he sort of is the way it's treated historically. So yeah. Some people are just looking at it. Some people are doing it. Some people are looking at it in order to do it. Some people are looking at it to tell us what to do.
But it's written in such a lot of the tone of the book. It's like, I don't know how you don't make the judgment in these. I don't know how you chronicle in American by paper, or how you explain what's going on and deal with these people. And when you shared last semester that it was a dissertation project with the prisons, and there was was it homeless? We talked about you had a guest speaker. She was in the mirror.
Yes.
And I asked, I don't know how you maintain any type of distance. I don't know how you get involved in studying this stuff and don't just every other sentence be a judge. Like maybe I would fail in all the writing I would do of these things if that's some type of requirement.
Well, our job is definitely to make a change, I think. But so go back to the rhetorical situation where I've got this woman who tells me that her sign in her town is not racist, and here's why. Okay, so as a rhetorician, as an activist,
three things. One, I have to tell my people that I do demonstrations with all the time, is it what's more important, to be the most radical person in the room or to get a damn thing done? Because you cannot do both. I promise you can't do both. So there may be some that would argue because I would suggest that standing on a desk and pounding my fist and saying, "You're racist for everything you just said. Let me explain how." That wasn't going to accomplish what I wanted to accomplish, but then, you know, sort of watch it, Susan, like, she's gonna blow. I promise. I've heard this many times before. This is how racism works in the world. You can root it out, but it's still going to exist. It's about the system. It's not about the people. So if we're about changing the system, then what we need to do is we need to show and explore and understand how the system is screwing people, right? And so they have this critical distance. They're interested in that subject, not because they don't have an idea of what should be. They're interested in that particular topic because we need to know how it ended up so screwed up. You know, what sense are we to make of this? As you were saying, like, so lynching, right? and Michelle Alexander, who frames, and she does have shoulds all over that because she's looking at contemporary mass incarceration as the new Jim Crow, and then the documentary The 13th, who's looking at the ways in which the failure of the 13th Amendment has enabled mass incarceration to sort of reinscribe slavery on America by just incarcerating all our African American men. So what's my answer to you? My answer is, if you want, if like Roman Garcia, if Carmen Kennard, who's at TCU, and we want to bring her here too. I'm inspired by these kinds of people who are doing this kind of work, but mostly they're speaking from subject positions that are oppressed in some very significant ways, you know. So that's one thing, and I don't want to be white personing what's right, but also I need you to stand back for a minute and listen to. Let me lay it out. Here's how lynching worked. And then, do you feel me? Trayvon Martin, do you hear what I'm saying? And then we get little glimpses, and oh my God, she just paradigm shifted the shit out of me. Oh, we've done it. Revolution, the system's starting to change. But basically, like, how does the system like muffle all of this? And so I would suggest that looking at these things as rhetoricians, understanding how these systems work is vital to making change, because I have been around these people who I adore. But how in the world is this going to actually change anything? I mean, we did some really cool stuff. Like, there is no public transportation mass public transportation in Arlington, the biggest city in the nation that has no public mass transportation. What is that? How is that problematic? Problematic in 100 different ways. And people can't afford to live near that. Like in McKinney, there's none in either. Where do the people who work at the Chick-fil-A around the corner live, because they can't live anywhere near this? But then they don't want, my city doesn't want to pay for a station in McKinney because it might bring the element from Dallas in there. And we know what the element means. I don't know how they're going to be, what are they going to put TVs on this? There are cops there. I don't know. But that's so they developed with some local artists some like pop-up bus stations that hey, there's no bus station. Look, there's a bus station right here. See, bus station. That means that we don't have a bus station because as white middle class people, I didn't even know that there wasn't any mass transportation in public. So that kind of stuff is I think interesting. But then we can look at things that just don't do a damn thing. Or the things that people have continued to do and they haven't made any difference, or the things that people have done and they've gotten misread and they've actually done harm, even though that wasn't intended. So should does have a place in scholarship, I think, especially if you're looking at, activism. But in the margins of what it is that we're studying, I think that it can be kind of problematic because we want to assume that the people who are coming to your book come to it with similar politics, right? The person who's reading this book about lynching is not going to be one that will probably be all over the idea of, oh no, Black Lives Matter, no, all lives matter, that kind of thing. We probably don't need to be convincing those people. Maybe we do, because then now you can see it. Okay, now can you see it through the frame of lynching? Now you got it. But basically, where's the system failing rhetorically, and how might we recalibrate the ways in which events and artifacts and people and stories are framed, so that we don't just reify oppression, even though we're trying not to, because it's happened a lot. And so yeah, that, and also we want people to hear us. I get frustrated with my fellow activists because they'll say, well, you know, they shouldn't be doing shouldn't, and you know, capitalism bad, down with the man. Well, yeah, we're all here, man. That's why we agree. So now what? Do we want to just talk about how much the man sucks, or what are we going to do? So
that's the problem that I'm having.
Oh yeah.
Okay, like I'm with you. I understand. You know, I'm not. I guess it's because they don't have to convince me. So they don't have to spend 200 pages convincing me they're right. Like, we can gloss over it.
Let's just start with goodwill.
Now what?
What happened? What broke?
Now what? Like,
yeah.
But like, yes, it's broken. Yes, I'm with you. Yes, it's terrible. I mean, my run-in with ID is enough of an explanation to me that the system is broken. I don't need. I can only imagine how much harder it is for marginalized communities.
And what you just did in your midterm project is what I hope that the best scholars are doing. Is right now you just personalized the hell out of. They made this broken system so clearly arbitrary and unintentionally problematic that, as you said, a white man gets whipped up into it, and you're having these regular fights. So I think what you did with your midterm project was an activist project that should got nowhere on it, because the should of it was like, this is bananas. You know, this is sort of like a demonstration that said, here's how it works.
And that, compared to what I'm still doing with the university, that's nothing. That's a kick.
I know.
I'm over that.
I know.
I'm so far over that because of what I'm still dealing with to convince the grad school I don't live in New Jersey.
This is such a dissertation. I know when you get some critical distance from it, that things are solved.
I can't even write the thing. I can't even write it up as a thing that's over, because I still was sending email earlier today. I'm not even done.
Oh, I just realized I catch you guys way over. Sorry. So next time we'll finish up the presentations and keep this conversation going. We'll also look a little bit more. I want to. What I've done is I've linked this particular getting started thing. We'll do a couple of other lectures to our assignments page. I'm just trying to kind of. I know some are intimidated by, you know, coming up with the right thing, and I think I just pick something that you find is kind of groovy and we're spending a little time with, whether you want to go in the direction that they're saying or not. So I put it there, if you want to eyeball it before next time, though, but I'll talk about it more next time. Is just really quickly get to that. Okay, yeah. This where to look for this kind of stuff. We'll play with some keywords, some from Thing Explainer, some just from the world. You know, so punch card is memory, storage, history, fortune teller, and then we'll look at, you know. So now once you have your keywords, now what do you do? Critical scholar, bibliographies, blah blah blah. We'll talk about that next time. And then what am I doing about these things? And then, you know, so forth. So we'll talk some more about that. And so have in mind, I think, more, maybe you already have several sources that include news sources, I imagine, that are dealing with your project. Song lyrics and...
Yeah, I've got the sort of activist stuff associated with that sneak. I've got a video where before he does, the singer of this band for that one song I'm going to examine, before they play an unrelated song, talks about basically a 5-minute tangent about this was after 9/11, but before the war in Iraq. He was explaining this is what they're doing. They're marching us to a war and encouraging the audience to meet them at the White House lawn. This is the scene that I came from. So this is why I have a problem with our textbooks, because I'm used to being told, okay, now we go here. Now we do this. We don't just close the book and like, it's okay. Yeah, that was bad news. Like, now we go. What do we do now? What's the next thing, right?
That's for us to figure out.
So,
But this is a complicated project. Yeah, a lot of people study activism and don't do it. But that's true. That's problematic. But yeah. But you're looking at somebody who did this activist work, and let's see what happened. Yeah.
Okay.
And then we'll all pick up an instrument, because that's what you can do in punk, right? I mean, everybody can play anything, because that's the aesthetic. I loved it. That's what I listened to, because that was the only music that was political in the 80s. So, all right, guys. I will see you next week then. Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.